As the call for more support for workers grew this week, the Prime Minister said the disaster payments for stood-down workers were exactly the same level as the JobKeeper wage subsidy was in the December quarter of last year. Economist Alison Pennington from the Australia Institute's Centre for Future Work is among those calling for JobKeeper to be reinstated.
When the JobKeeper wage subsidy was introduced, the original rate was at $750 for a full-time worker. I think comparing the cash payments now to the same, just because they're close to the same rate, is wrong on for a couple of reasons. I mean, the rate is lower, so we're talking $600 a week, which actually isn't sufficient for a large number of workers to continue to pay all their necessary bills. And it's $170 actually below the full-time minimum wage. So if our systems understand that there's a certain rate that's required for a worker to exist, surely these cash payments should be at a level that they can continue to meet their household needs. But a really key reason why purely just the level of the payment means that it's nowhere near the same as the wage subsidy is because the wage subsidy was designed to retain workers and keep them connected to their jobs. While the JobKeeper subsidy had many, many problems, and its design, including excluding over 1 million casual workers, the revenue test being really weak and open to rorting. That key design feature of retaining a workforce is missing from this package. And from an economic perspective, this puts Australia's economy in a broad macro sense in a much weaker position when we come out of these lockdowns.
On that point of keeping workers attached to their employer, that did present some interesting anomalies in the official labour force data. What kind of impact do you expect the lockdowns to have on the workforce now, as well as that official data?
So there was a large kind of area of our ABS stats where we could say that it was the impact of JobKeeper in keeping unemployment rates artificially low. But I think that the strength of the recovery in even just the month after lockdowns, and especially from the period from May to November last year, it showed that the JobKeeper subsidy must have played a clear role in allowing snapback in employment. We cannot be certain now that workers who have been stood down because of lockdowns will not show up in unemployment statistics on the other side.
We've heard the New South Wales government now refer to this as a national emergency. In light of this, what impact do you see the lockdowns having on GDP?
Well, we just have to look back to what happened, last year when we went through large lockdowns, and we know there was this two-track narrative going on about this great and glorious recovery that Australia was experiencing, but it was being dragged down by Victoria's lockdown, and I'm sure a lot of listeners will remember that line of narrative. And it was absolutely the case that if you stand down hundreds of thousands of workers from being able to earn as higher incomes as they were, for businesses to produce as much output as they were, of course GDP is going to take a hit. So I think given that we're looking now at two of the largest states in Australia in lockdown and also South Australia, a smaller state, of course we're going to see this quarter a significant decline in GDP.
We saw this week a bit of a change in language and emphasis from some policymakers on the role of workplaces and what they're having in terms of the spread of the virus. What did you make of that?
So workplaces were always going to be central to the focus of transmission and this pandemic response. What has been really startling is seeing the very massive, huge, vast gaping hole in between the response of the Victorian government and the New South Wales government to the problem of workplace transmission. So it's been only just recently the New South Wales government has agreed to implement a definition of what is an essential worker and who is not.
Alison Pennington, thanks for your time.
The bottom 20% get nothing. They're really unfair tax cuts.
People want to see much stronger action from the government when it comes to climate change.
It's no coincidence that we have a wages crisis in Australia.
Transitioning to net zero emissions, it doesn't seem like there's much room for gas.